Yeah, no, definitely. Glad to be back on the show, Ryan and Shayne. And I'm pretty excited about what Michigan State's done in the last month, maybe month and a half now. I mean, it's kind of time flies, but I know last time I was on the show, we kind of were talking about what the future may hold for Jonathan Smith and the Michigan State football program, and not really having any true intel of which way they were going to go, and making the move to move on from Jonathan Smith seemed kind of like the only really possible way to do it for the program to get back on track. And I've been excited about a lot of the things that they've done since. The hiring of Pat Fitzgerald seems to be promising. There's obviously some who have some question marks around how things ended at Northwestern, not necessarily the off-the-field things, but, the last few seasons outside the COVID year. So there's some skeptical, fans out there still, but I personally think it's been it's a good hire. It's a safe hire. It's a stabilizing hire for Michigan State. And then some of the moves he's made with his own staff since then, too, is got me personally excited and, giving me some confidence that maybe we can get this thing back on track at Michigan State.
That's been interesting to me. You mentioned, we haven't really talked about this with any of the other state folks, the Fitzgerald's history, because although we don't like to go in kind of the salacious, gossipy stuff,
right,
unless it's more kind of news-driven discussion on it, but I've seen it come up because obviously the juxtaposition of the timing of it, they hired Fitzgerald, and then shortly after we had the whole thing with Sharon Moore, then there was a lot of throwing back and forth among the Michigan and Michigan State camps of, well, your guy this and, well, your guy that, which I never like those arguments because both things can be true. Neither can be true. It's not, one doesn't impact the other. But it's interesting to me that there wasn't really any discussion, and there's been a lot of vetting of that situation, and then there was a settlement, and obviously State did their own vetting on it. We've talked about on the show, especially with the history, you want to kind of make sure that this is somebody coming in with very few problems, so they had to be confident that there wasn't going to be anything going forward, because although Smith did kind of provide that, they had some folks in the history, Tucker and other parts of the program, other sports and things at State that you don't necessarily want to get back into the scandal territory no matter what school you're going to. But if you already have a history of that, it makes it tougher. But clearly they think this is, that's in the past, and they're ready to move forward here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it certainly seems like. I mean, I know he, won his lawsuit against Northwestern, and it seemed like he was essentially fired without true cause, right? And that whole, hazing thing that went on, and, all the details that are out there and whatnot. And the thing, too, is obviously, being proven in a court of law, in a lawsuit where I'm sure he was paid out pretty handsomely by Northwestern is one thing, but also the fact that Michigan State moved so quickly after the season ended, they let Jonathan Smith go the next day, and then you're finding out that night that there's reports that Pat Fitzgerald is going to be the next coach. So it was clear that things were working in the background, and that Jay Batt had done his homework. It wasn't like a impromptu hiring. I think they vetted it out as much as they needed to internally, outside of what they already kind of knew from the legal part of it. And it happened so quickly that you have to have faith that they know what they're doing with this hire, right? So it's like any coaching search. I listen to a podcast where they always say, love to hire, have no idea if it'll work. And it's kind of one of those things, because I thought, about 2 years ago now, that Jonathan Smith was a home run hire at the time. And I think a lot of people thought that way. And it obviously didn't work out. So outside of, the hazing thing that went on, Pat Fitzgerald had a lot of success there. Last few years at Northwestern did kind of, go downhill for him, but it was also when college football started to change, right? Northwestern has the academic piece to it. They don't, to my knowledge, have the same kind of booster and donor support and, the transfer portal piece of it with, again, academics playing in there. So I don't know, again, one of the things outside of the off-field issues, if you have some skeptical thoughts on Fitzgerald, it's going to be how those last few years went for him. But it was a changing sport. It's a different, dynamics now at Michigan State compared to where he was at Northwestern. And, he's a Midwest guy. He's got Midwest ties, and I think that's going to go a long way because, that was something that Jonathan Smith didn't have, and certainly I think came to bite him in the butt towards the end there.
And like you said, he's making a lot of hires that make you think, okay, he's got some pull here. There's a lot of, I mean, it seems to be all across the board. Everybody is pretty hopeful. It went from when we were talking about Smith in the last interview, kind of a bit of a malaise with the program to now they're hopeful on every side of things. They got a lot of boosters that are excited and getting involved. I've seen a lot of former Spartans get more in tune with the program here. Then the level of coaches that he was able to recruit, he's getting some Michigan State guys back in the program. I thought that, I know there's a lot of news about the offensive coordinator, but I thought the way they handled the defensive coordinator situation was really a good sign because they kind of got the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, no, they really did. I think keeping Joe Rossi was the right move. I mean, Rossi ultimately, I think, earned his job back and earned his, reason to be brought back after the way they ended the season. I know maybe that last game here against Maryland, they gave quite a bit of points, but otherwise, they had a really strong finish. Even the Michigan game where, Michigan ended up getting some points in the end, they kept them in the game. The defense was, the bright spot, and, Rossi's enthusiasm on the sidelines certainly won over the fan base, and you could tell there's a connection with the players. So I think, there's been a lot of portal entries in the last few days, but some of the guys they were able to retain, like, Jordan Hall, I think that happens because you brought back Joe Rossi. And then, as you said, you kind of best of both worlds because you bring in you have Joe Rossi come back, but you also then get to bring in a guy like Max Bulla, who is, considered by many one of those rising coaches, one of those rising, smart defensive minds. Obviously has, the history of Michigan State, a Spartan legend on the field. And it started to build his way up at Notre Dame, where as the linebackers coach really, again, seemed to be one of those promising young guys. And to get him to leave Notre Dame to come to Michigan State is a move, and obviously I'm sure there's some money behind it. I'm sure there's some heartstrings, pulling there too. But that's a big addiction, and it's going to hopefully, pay dividends when you complement him with, with the Joe Rossi, as that veteran leadership.
Well, and a lot of the news when they were trying to figure out what to do with that defensive coordinator position, or both coordinators, but do they let Rossi go? Do they get somebody in? A lot of Spartans Wire and a lot of the other pundits were talking about, well, I don't know if Bull is quite ready to be a defensive coordinator, but he's also one of those guys that you can miss the boat on, because if he's at Notre Dame and ascending and then bouncing around, you might miss the boat, and he would be past coming back to Michigan State because that's where you are kind of in the general rankings of college football. That can happen. Sure, you can still pull those heartstrings, but you never know. Is that Shayne? You were kind of nodding your head on Bull. Is that a family that you're kind of have some familiarity with there?
Well, when I was a coach on Michigan State staff, I think Chuck Bulla was a coach there, and Chuck played there. I know the whole Bulla family is kind of a dynasty there. I think I can't remember the youngest, but he was playing there at the time as well. So I think that family has just kind of been connected to the university in such a good way that it's a legacy.
Exactly. I mean, that's the type of guy that you want to get back in the program, especially with the hire like Fitzgerald, because he seems to align with Fitzgerald pretty well in how they look at things and background and all of that, Robert. So I feel like that was a home run hire, but I just didn't know if they'd be able to get him back in anything less than defensive coordinator, and then you were having to get rid of Rossi. But like I said, they kind of played both sides of that one.
Yeah, they did. They really did. I think, they did it perfectly. And, I think he did get also labeled the co-DC. And my understanding is that Rossi is going to be probably, that primary defense coordinator. But, Max gets to learn under him. And obviously under Fitzgerald, who was a star linebacker back in his day, and obviously the defensive-minded head coach. So I think it's a perfect situation for Michigan State. I think it's a pretty darn good situation for Max Bulla, too, and coming back to Michigan State, getting this opportunity. I'm sure it was tough to leave Notre Dame with what they have running there, and obviously what they have built up at with the Fighting Irish right now. But I think there's an opportunity too for Max Bulla to probably work his way up to maybe the full-time DC if Joe Rossi looks for other opportunities as a head coach eventually if things work out. And it was like you said, Ryan, is that I don't know if he was ready to come and be that full-time DC. At this point in his career, still, a younger coach, and that's a lot of responsibility, and especially for where Michigan State's at, kind of in a fragile spot if they can't they can't really screw this one up. They've kind of screwed up the last two in a lot of ways, so they can't screw up what's going on now. And being able to get Max back to bring back some of that juice, some of that Spartan pride, but also not have to give him all the wheel is probably a perfect. Playing both sides of the coin, as you said.
Yeah, you've got a good succession plan in place if you get those two guys there. But you mentioned a name that I think is one of the more important ones in this process as far as the player side of things. I mean, I don't know, your rankings would be much more important than mine on this, but as far as impact on the team, I don't think you could take a lot of players ahead of Jordan Hall for the team last year, and so getting him back, I think, is going to be important. I'm curious what you've been following all the portal movement. So what else sticks out to you other than retaining him, as far as, because that's the part that with hiring Fitzgerald that my mind immediately went to. I understand the hire, I understand his background and his success and the Midwest ties and all of those things. The timing made it very tough on him as far as when he was coming into play. It seems like he's done well with that, but it is late in the game to establish relationships with some of these existing guys, try to get people over in the portal. He doesn't have, it's not a similar situation to say like a Kyle Whittingham who comes into Michigan and he comes from a previous team that he probably can pull some guys from Utah. There's probably some guys that will follow him. Fitzgerald hasn't been coaching in the last few years, so he doesn't, although I'm sure he has contacts, he doesn't have the same immediate contact with players like some of these other coaches that are actively coaching.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely a good point. With Jonathan Smith, even when he came back a couple of years ago, the big draw was bringing in A.H. Childs, right, as his quarterback from Oregon State. So you don't get that with Pat Fitzgerald, and not coming from a spot where he can bring some of his guys with him. But I think the way the portal, and it seems like every year it changes, it fluxes and whatnot. But I think it's alarming when you see, I think it's 30 plus names from Michigan State enter the portal on top of what you're going to lose from the senior class. But the things I think you have to keep in mind is that anytime someone enters the portal, it's not necessarily because maybe they wanted to leave, maybe it's not because Michigan State wanted them to leave, but there's that NIL piece of it where maybe they don't think what that particular player was being paid from the previous coaching staff is what they deserve to be paid on the new staff. So there's a budget factor in there, and I think that's what we saw with a couple of the guys yesterday when there was a flurry entering the portal that I'm sure Michigan State would have loved to have him back, but they're not going to probably pay him what the old staff paid him. And it's a piece of college sports now that wasn't there, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera, but it's a big piece of it. So when you talk about the guys that are leaving, I think there are a few that you would love to have back. I mean, obviously, Nick Marsh is the first one that everyone will point to, but, that's a lot of money to keep him. And I always would consider a receiver of his nature kind of a luxury piece in the sense that, if you're a team that's contending to make the playoff or contending to win 9-10 games, you want that guy on your team. If you're a team like Michigan State who's just trying to get back things on track and trying to make a bowl game, you don't necessarily, you could spend his $1 million, let's just say, towards, 5 players that can make up that gap. So, it's alarming when you see the amount of players entering the portal, but I think it was ultimately expected, and I think it's nothing to be too alarmed about or too worried about as a Michigan State fan. You are keeping some key guys like Jordan Hall. I'm glad that they got Alessio it sounds like he's locked in coming back again as your probably returning starter unless they do look elsewhere in the portal. So you got some key pieces on both offense and defensive side of the ball. They just right before we got the call, I saw Connor Moore, one of their key offensive linemen, announced he's coming back for next year. That was another guy that potentially can make more money on the portal market. So, I think the guys you do see come back are the guys that this coaching staff really liked. They really found a way to make sure they got the money they deserve and made sure they came back. I don't think you see anyone on that list of, outgoing that they've really, feel heartbroken that they're losing. Again, I'm not going to say, I wouldn't want Nick Marsh or I wouldn't want, Mekhi Frazier back, but I also don't think, the staff's willing to pay what they deserve to be paid on the market, where Michigan State's at right now.
Yeah, that's the big thing with Marsh, especially because we talked to Chris Solari a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he still has some hope that they could be in the mix for Marsh, but it just seems like it'd be too far of a bridge on that price tag.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Again, just from reading the tea leaves, hearing what other people say about it, and you look at there was a report just I think yesterday, maybe the day before that, LSU and Notre Dame have emerged, and it's kind of the two teams to watch for Nick Marsh. And it's like if you're Nick Marsh, who probably has one more year before he's probably trying to go pro, does it make sense to come back to Michigan State, who's rebuilding, or do you do a kind of, we saw another Michigan State receiver, Keon Coleman, a few years ago, go to a contender for, something bigger, have a big season, then go pro? Again, I'd love to have Nick Marsh back. He's the type of guy that can win you a game, can make some plays, and would be their best offensive player. And you hate seeing at Michigan State 3 of the last 4 years your top NFL prospect leaving through the portal and going to a contender. But with where Michigan State's at, I agree. I think the bridge is going to be probably too much, and I wouldn't blame him. As long as he's not going down the street to Michigan. I know there were some who thought that might happen, but I'm just glad if he's not in the Amazing Blue, I won't hold anything against him.
That would be a tough one to transfer.
Yeah.
That it's happened. It will happen, but not necessarily with a player that big. But yeah, interesting stuff. They've got a lot of good movement and momentum on the team. But want to come back and talk some college football as a whole and continue talking Michigan State. We'll come back here with Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Robert Bondy, one of our favorites to cover the Spartans and really sports as a whole. He keeps his finger on the pulse here, and I'm curious what you've thought about the college football playoff so far here. It's been an interesting set of matchups. One of the conversations I wanted to have with Shayne at some point, we didn't have it in the first 2 open segments, but it's been a big discussion about the whole concept of, do you put truly the 12 best teams in, or do you make some room for the underdogs so you can have a little bit more of a Cinderella format? But then ultimately a team that was highly questioned, we talked about this last year, Indiana was highly questioned for being admitted into the college football playoff. I think you and I both thought they were legitimate, but there were schedule strength questions, and now they're all the way up to number 1, and now nobody's really saying that, but there's always going to be questions. It was Notre Dame this year, it was Alabama, who maybe that might come out again, but they did win their first round game. It's always tough to get that exactly right, but college football as a whole is just so unregulated. So I feel like that's the main thing that needs to be is like the whole thing needs to be reined in. NIL, transfer portal, college football playoff. There's just not a lot of direction of where to go, so it's kind of hard because it's like, people are going to work the advantages of the system if you do have some advantages to be worked.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's been fun to watch, and I should probably start off by saying congrats to your Hoosiers. That was pure domination what they did to Alabama. I was watching the game before coming on, and when we were talking about what time I'd be coming out, I was wondering if we'd be watching a nail biter at the end of it when this segment started, or if it would be a blowout. It was an early blowout, but to your point, it's tough because I personally like that they include the 5 conference champions, which this year happened to be 2 from that group of 5 stage. With James Madison and Tulane, but I like that they give them a chance. I think when we see this thing expand in a few years, I would hope they continue to do that, but they also will include more of those blue bloods. Because again, this year was a tough year, especially because you have a team like Notre Dame, who was probably the first team left out, where they took Miami and Alabama over, and we're splitting hairs, I think, because Miami obviously has proven what we saw last night, what they did against Ohio State, and then also winning on the road at A&M the week before. They obviously deserve to be in over Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame head-to-head, and they've proven on the field since then, too. And, Alabama also went on the road and won a game, but the field really does, we deserve to have a team like Notre Dame in there because they ultimately did everything right even after, that tough start. So it's been fun. It's been competitive. There's been some blowouts. So there's blowouts every year, and I think people always say, well, why are there so many blowouts? It's just simply the nature of it, right? Even when it was a 14 playoff, there was always at least 1, if not 2 blowouts in that format, too. So there always will be, I think if they do expand it to, 16 or, I think 4 teams in play as well. I've even heard models of 24 teams, right? So, they could expand all the way to what they would do with FCS, Division 2, 3 levels as well. I wouldn't hate it because I think the more the merrier. I've always kind of felt that way when it comes to the playoff. But I also do, understand those who feel that, the regular season should be more sacred and you should have to earn your way in. So, the last few years, you have, probably seen a team like, last year especially, Ohio State wouldn't have been in the field if you, didn't have the expanded playoff after they lost to Michigan and didn't win the Big Ten. They went on to win the title and were clearly the best team in the country last year. We're looking at now where that could be Miami. Miami probably was wouldn't be in if we were at an 18 model or a 14 model. And, they've proven in the first 2 rounds they could go on and win the whole thing. So it's been fun. It's been exciting. And the nice thing, too, is there's a little bit of new blood this year. Obviously we still have Georgia left. But other than that, Oregon, Indiana, Miami, those are teams that sure have, some of that prestige and brand to them. But those are also teams I don't think have won a title either ever or at least in a long time for Miami. So it's been fun. It's I'm excited to watch this next game here with Ole Miss and Georgia kicking off what I think at the top of the hour, and that'll be a good game too, hopefully.
That's one of the games I was thinking of, because you talk about kind of the fact that you like the inclusion of the more, Cinderella teams, the teams that maybe play in smaller divisions, not as highly rated divisions. I mean, look at who's playing quarterback for Ole Miss here in this game. Yep. He came from Ferris State. We're familiar with him in this area, Trinidad Chambliss. He came, that team still maintained a lot of talent. We just talked to somebody on our other show there. We talked to the associate athletic director of Ferris about the talent that they were able to maintain, but they lost, I think, 8 guys to major college programs, lost a lot of talent, but that was clearly big-time talent. I mean, Chambliss, if he had played all year, I maintain he probably should have been in the Heisman. I know he was in the Heisman conversation, but he probably would have been invited to New York had he played all 12 games and started in all 12 games. So, and he was not languishing, but he was over here at Ferris State hiding from everybody else. And then Lane Kiffin gets him as his backup quarterback, and lo and behold, he's top 8 in the Heisman award this year. And now he's getting ready for a big time rematch with Georgia. So yeah, there's talent to be had. Signetti did the same thing. He took a bunch of talent from James Madison, and that's what fueled the school last year. And a lot of the transfers that he's getting aren't necessarily top of the market transfers. He's taken the talent that is right for the team and elevating them. Something that probably somebody like Fitzgerald is trying to do at Michigan State, because that's been their valley with guys like Mark D'Antonio and others in the past.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's kind of the mold of how you have to do it, right? You have your guys on roster that you brought in through the recruiting, because it is always so. I think, in my opinion, to be you build your teams through recruiting, and you can supplement through the transfer portal is probably the perfect way to do it. And I think even with Signetti, he's kind of a unicorn in all this, right? Because I know it's been a lot of transfers that have came in and hit the ground running and made it work. But you do look typically at those those teams that are at the top of it. It's because they recruit really well, and then they find these guys who come in and make a difference in the portal. And obviously Chambliss is a perfect example of that at Ole Miss. He was supposed to be their backup this year, and injuries led to one thing, and he got his chance, and not only did he get his chance, he's running with it. And it's a fun local story. It's fun for Ole Miss too. Obviously he went through the whole Lane Kiffin debacle and how he kind of played them and led them on for so long. So I'm excited to watch that one. I'm excited to see how he does tonight, and rooting for the local kid. And again, it'd be nice to even if it beat Georgia, then we are really looking at a kind of I hate to call it Cinderella story because these are all really good teams and they're all really good programs. I mean, even Indiana, who I think would be considered the quote Cinderella. I mean, there's no Cinderella about them this year. They're the number 1 team in the country for a reason. They deserve it. So it'll be fun though. That's not just Ohio State, Georgia, or it's not just Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera. Right? Again, we're going to see some new matchups, some new blood, and that's the parity in college football right now. It's kind of crazy how different it can happen, how quickly it can change in just a short amount of time. Especially with what we're talking about with the transfer portal and NIL, you would think that would maybe concentrate some of the talent and the winning, but it's led to more parity. Shane, I'm curious where you lie on this. We're discussing with Robert about kind of the idea of right now it's a 12-team college football playoff, but the idea of, do we try to put the 12 best teams in there, or do we try to leave room for the James Madisons and Tulanes of the world, or do we expand it so that we can involve a little bit more? But then, of course, whenever you expand it, then you're still leaving. It doesn't matter if you go to 16 or 24 or 152, you're still going to be leaving the 153rd out of there.
I mean, you see it every year with March Madness, so it's always something that kind of makes you it's always something that kind of makes you feel like the March Madness pool. Everyone gets that, fills it out, there's always some team complaining that they didn't get in that should have got in. And how many start in that one? I mean,
64. 64. Now it's 68 with the play-in. Yeah.
Well, and maybe that's the answer is a play-in, right? Like you come up with some sort of system where some of the group schools kind of get their chance. I don't know how you do that. That's above my pay grade. We thought 4 was going to be better than just the 2 top teams, and then we complained about the 4. And now we've got 12, and now we're complaining about the 12. So it does become very cyclical, and it's something that I think will never have a perfect model. But I mean, I think this year you hate to throw shade at anyone that feels like they deserve it, but I felt like there were teams that should have been there. I think most people would agree. Is it purely on ranking? I mean, I honestly hate the ranking system, because I don't like it when certain teams get ranked in the top 5 without playing a single game, and then they lose early, and then they get to be rewarded for that high ranking later in the season because they never dropped that far. But then you have other teams that go all year, struggle to climb the rankings, and don't quite get up high enough, and then they lose one game and it kills them. And I'm not a fan. I think they shouldn't start the rankings until like week 5 or 6 or something. And then, if they had a way to maybe do some sort of a play-in, I think you try to do that. But who knows what the best model's going to be.
That's a great point, though, about the rankings, because it's something that's kind of always gotten under my skin a little bit, too. And you are basically giving teams an advantage based on kind of historical data, because you're going to rank the teams with a better reputation, a better history, inherently a little bit better. Indiana had to earn their way up. I saw that. That's completely legitimate. They hadn't been good, so they had to play their way into that. And then maybe some of the other teams in even the Big Ten, a Michigan or an Ohio State, they're going to be more prominent and ranked higher. So yeah, it's not as uniform as it needs to be. We talked about that a little earlier in the segment, how there's just not, it doesn't feel like you say it's above your pay grade. If it's above your pay grade, it's definitely above my pay grade. But the problem is we don't know whose pay grade it is, because we don't really have a lot of people actually kind of truly in charge of the process, and it feels like that are the visionaries and actually have the authority to kind of manage all of this.
Well, and I think even when there's always some genius concept, let's form a committee, and this committee is comprised of experts on football, right?
Right.
Or it's supposed to be.
Right.
And sometimes you see people and you're like, what are they doing on that? But you know what? There's another type of leadership cycle that I think we see every day in the news, in politics, that committees and bureaucracy and all of that literally do nothing but slow things down and make things harder. And who knows what, do you make it an association of active coaches, or do you make it, they have to be all retired coaches? But do you have people on there that really just have no background in anything, or have never really proven themselves at a really high level to kind of be in a consideration spot where their opinion matters?
It's a great point. And I mean, that's one of the groups that is trying to have some oversight in some of the things in college football. There's some Congress involvement in some of the subject matters too. And then that's even further distance from things. So it's an interesting discussion. But Robert, we appreciate you joining the show. We appreciate the discussion. We appreciate all the information about the Spartans and otherwise here. We'll look forward to having you back on this show. For people that want more of Robert, he'll be on Sports Intel on Monday. We'll be talking some Spartans basketball with him. We knew we had enough information to kind of separate and talk some basketball with him on that show. But tell the people where they can follow you here in the meantime.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm always writing for Spartans Wire. It's spartanswire.usatoday.com. And just check us out. It's going to be crazy starting tomorrow. The portal opens, so there'll be a lot of action for Michigan State especially. So follow me there. We'll have you covered for anything Michigan State football, basketball, hockey, and the rest.